I think you guys already know most of the panels here. We like to ask Arnie to maybe introduce yourself. Is that the microphone? Hello. Hello. Yes. Okay. Great. So why don't we start from Arnold and do a bit of self-introduction? I think that the theme of this today's session is also on East meets West. So we want to look at some of the differences and commonalities between East and West. So maybe just one quick comment about East versus West. Do you think we are more similar or more different of our approaches to food as well as our approaches to helping others?
Hello, everybody. I'm very grateful to be here with fellow panelists. My name is Arun. I'm from the Good Food Institute APAC. We are a non-profit think tank working to develop the alternative protein industry globally. So for us, that's plant-based meat, fermentation-derived ingredients, and cultivated meat. And I work as a sci-tech engagement specialist. So my background in material science, really, into the sensory aspect, but I think I would cover all things protein related. And I guess my comment is, globally we're seeing a decline in plant-based meat sales, and we see a lot of companies really looking to push on price parity, health and nutrition, and then on the taste aspect. So on that side, I would say between East and West, I think developing sensorial aspects is a big similarity. Just the approaches might be different.
Thank you.
It's my turn. I would say that when we look at the literature and try to monitor the differences between the different ancestral groups that could be connected with different geographic areas when it comes to taste, when it comes to olfaction, we have some initial evidence of the differences, but we don't have a systematic approach to it. So honestly, we still have to map more reliably what happens across different population groups. So we do know that there are genetic differences, for instance, in the sugar sensitivity, and so the same compound is perceived very differently based on your ancestry. So I feel like we're starting to scratch the surface of that, and I think like collaborations and like the type of conversation that we're engaging here will facilitate it.
Thank you. What's your comment?
Maybe I comment a little bit from maybe from considering the environment to which the consumer is living to some extent. I mean, attitudes, beliefs, etc., can be quite different from culture to another, and even the generational influence of the younger persons and what they carry into their view of food, sustainability, more health, that differs, as I see it, one to another. I think that has an impact on the choice of foods, or it has an impact on the opportunity for food in one market or another. In terms of the transition towards a plant-based diet, more sustainable diet, I think we all had great hope that, through COVID times, there's a huge uptake and so on. That seems to have fallen away to quite a large extent. The United States, in many ways, a younger person, from what I can see, I'm not sure now where the perhaps on the sensory food.
Thank you. That's objective.
I think it's more common between the East and West. At least we are all civilized human beings. We like a good food. We like tasty food. That's common for sure. But if we face on Asian countries, as in Asia and East, there are much wide variety of food and the source of food. Just to take an example, in China, when we Chinese people eat animal is from having to pay everything. Princess make a joke that say Chinese people eat everything that has 4 legs except the table and chair. So it's not rich resources. But of course, different ethnicity and different physiology compared to East and West. For example, the saliva combination, the biting force, the jaw geometry. So that's some difference that we don't know what impact this will be. Another very even in East, another very different challenge is young generation to older generation. That's a big difference. For young generation, is more exploring of new kind of food, like the milk tea. It's a really new challenge. For older generation, there's no point in waste money. For young generation, it's quite a cool thing to do with tea. So even with significant possibilities.
Thank you. So within the same geographical location, you also get segmented markets based on age ranges, for example, maybe even social economic statuses as well. So I think that's all part of that complexity, perhaps, of the type of material, type of domains that we're trying to study. So before I move on to some more questions, just to a note for the audience, we will have a 10 minutes open section, I'm hoping, at the end of the panel session. Invite all of you to ask a question. So while we are talking here, please feel free to kind of format your questions, and then later on we'll have an open mic that asks around. Focus any question you want to the panel to discuss as well. So while that happens, now we can continue a bit further on onto the discussions perhaps on East versus West. I'm just thinking of the answers that you guys gave to your introduction earlier. So I think we had a couple of similarities and differences revolving around the types of food cultures, for example, the type of population, for example. So looking at the two sides of the picture, you have differences in the food materials or flavors that you are creating, and on the other side of the picture, you have differences in the population, the human levels that you're measuring. And I think this panel is quite interesting because we have two people more on the academic side, right? Professor Chen and Tia, you studied very much on the person, human, sense of smell, the oral process. And on the side, we have Connor or Magarin looking more at the food ecosystem, how we manipulate, for example, flavors that we are adding to these food materials. So looking at it from an industrial perspective, manipulation of food materials, manipulation of flavors, do you think it's important then to also measure the human themselves in terms of the physiology, in terms of the receptors, in terms of the sense of smell, right? That sense of smell is something that people don't really measure very often from the industrial point of view. Do you think this is something that we should be focusing on consumer physiology, for example? Open question.
Yeah, so I think this is a great question, and my quick answer to that is absolutely yes. So maybe I'll give a little bit of context into how I prepared for this panel a little bit, and I was trying to think about this from an alt proteins point of view. And especially in alternate proteins, we're only now starting to get more sensorial data out there, right? So I did manage to find two big, publicly available data on this. One done on the U.S. market by Nectar, I think, is the company, and they looked at about 1,200 people, mostly on the west coast. And then we have our GFR APAC report on equating demand, looking at close to 6,000 people within the Southeast Asian region. So thinking actually on the point of market segmentation, like looking at the East, there's also different countries, it's different socioeconomic status of what's going on in there, right? But yeah, I think maybe on to this question specifically, just comparing some of the things I saw in both that, like, for example, from a consumer perception, it's not just sensory, but from a consumer perception standpoint, we have health being one of the top priorities that's coming up, right? But maybe people in the US are looking at things like low sodium or low cholesterol. But people in Southeast Asia are looking for more terminology around like easy to digest are just generally more healthy. So that speaks a little bit to like the cultural aspect of it, and then bringing it to the physiological part, or like maybe what we're used to, what we're genetically more prone to. I think cultural preferences showed up as like a big difference between the two studies. But in Southeast Asia, having a very strong different cultural preferences, different textures, different flavors came up a lot more.
Right, thank you. Yeah. So I was thinking of one that might well, dairy, for example, because for the physiology of Asian population, usually they're not so much used to lactose. Right. So that may be driving certain liking preferences because they get some kind of bloating discomfort, for example. Common, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on the subject.
Yeah, I mean, maybe back to similarities and differences. I mean, fundamentally, I think we're all quite the same when it comes to the underpinning drivers of our behavior, and whether it's to seek pleasure or enjoyment or, however, let's say food is valuable as a person. And what we seek, I mean, the format of the product, whether that be in a dairy product or in a one that could be a yogurt type of place and a different type of dairy product in another. The taste and so on can be different from one to another. And how much of that, yes, there are genetic differences, but how great an impact those differences have versus the environment or the food system where those persons become familiar. And my view would be, I mean, it would be a lesser. Perhaps there are segments within and across populations that have some relevance in terms of their, say, willingness or not to adopt and try new foods. When it comes to the question you asked earlier, should we be testing at the individual level? This is difficult to do. And somehow we would need to be able to scale that. We need to have some form of testing that then quickly scale because practicality is very difficult.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was looking at Valentina. Very nice segue to you.
I think I'm going to miss a little bit what you were saying into the olfactory world is not necessarily related to it directly, but to pleasantness of the odor. And so there has been a study that was run across different cultures, considering like Western countries, or so Asian countries, African, South American, and hunter-gatherer populations like more urban populations. So, the whole broad difference. And when there was a question of, I don't remember if there were 9 or more odors, but anyway, like a sufficient amount of odors, and we measured the variance across cultures, what we see is that the variance of due to culture is only 6%. So whereas the individualism or the variability is closer to 20-30%. And so this makes me think, yes, that genetics is really matter, but it's not practical. Like we kind of really ask every consumer to speak in a tube and then spend millions of dollars or whatever currency to actually figure out all of the genotype of everybody. And it's not even practical that they sell or market based on genetics per se. But I think a little more segmentation, like it's really interesting to me, and academic here, so I come out. I'm interested that I understand this may not translate to market as well. So there are levels of analysis that might not be worth doing. But I go back to the idea that there are some level of data that I think could be shared across academia and companies that will benefit us all and all these different things. And so I'm interested in kind of growing some of those systems of collaboration. And this seems like a good ground for a very differentiated ecosystem to do that. I want to see the norms. Like I want to understand how a person changes over time, how a person changes based on the cultural influences of which cuisine they might preferentially use. I want to understand if one of the questions is, for instance, kukumi can really exist outside of Asia. And maybe from pilot data that I have in Denmark, and they're just like, yeah. But there is something, once the cells do respond to things, that it doesn't matter what is your genotype, right? So it's just how we frame the question and we have enough data to tease apart a little bit of experiments.
Thank you very much for that. And Professor Chen, I'm also wondering, from the oral processing angle, is there other variances as well like this?
Yeah. I mean, of course, individual are really different physiological functions. Imagine that if you feed people with high starchy food to an individual which has a very low alpha amylase activity, that will be arrested. This alpha amylase varies among individuals. So I know the individual better than we will be able to.
But that's far,
That
right?
design, yeah. I don't know if we always say personalized nutrition, but whether we'll be able in future someday we can have personalized food design. But I think for specific population, if we elderly care, this is probably really need personalized because their eating capability and oral physiology really different from normal population and really individual. And the treatment is for elderly individual. It's linked to the safety and the life of certainty of eating. And in this case, personalized probably is very meaningful.
So from the healthcare perspective, it's more relevant to look at personalized food or materials. But maybe at population levels, there's just so much variation between individuals that it's not, we're more similar than we're different from that perspective. So I think just coming back a bit to the all protein kind of angle again, I was thinking about similar things that was mentioned earlier today, which was about how can we modify population level of fresh water, for example, saltiness, right? So taste perceptions. We know that alternate proteins, especially meat animals, right? In particular, they are criticized for having too much sodium in them because they need to have such high levels of additives in order to mask some of the flavors. So looking at that from population level changes in thresholds, for example, is there something we could do not just for salt, right, but also for, let's say, older thresholds, right? Do we see like this is a potential strategy or potential approach to get population level changes in healthcare and wellness if you want population-wide older olfactory training, right? It's putting out. But yes, I'd like to understand a bit more from that perspective.
Yeah, this is a great question. So I think, again, going back to like the similarities, I think there's a lot of concern around ultra processed food, high amount of salt, and there's also a lack of nutritional studies done on these all protein products right now. So a big driver for people especially from the Southeast Asian population, a big driver is for adoption would be people who perceive the all protein products as healthier, right? So this would really get more of the flexitarian market on board. But a lot of people actually in Southeast Asia are aware of all protein products, but much less have actually tried it as compared to because there's a much larger fear about it's actually not being healthy. So I think a lot more studies and a lot better education around these topics would be really beneficial. And one of the things which came up as a potential solution to like bridging some of these gaps is actually the idea of like blended products where we're combining animal-based ingredients with plant-based or all protein ingredients, and people are now perceiving this as something they're more familiar with. It might potentially reduce the amount of ingredients on that list and actually result in higher adoption over time. Right? So yeah, definitely a key issue and one of the potential solutions.
Thank you.
So in terms of let's say the nutritional value and let's say composition now, plant protein, alternate protein foods, and so on. And I think it's absolutely fundamental that we taste I mean the taste. Okay, the odor is very important also, but it's fundamental that there's the intensity in taste and the complexity. You don't have acceptance when you, let's say, remove salt, sugar, when you need to you lose intensity quite significantly. You also lose the complexity of the product overall. Of course, then you reveal all of the oak notes. You no longer have bitter masking and all of this. And so I think regardless, you cannot condition, I think, past a certain point. You do need to have a taste. If you want to make something more acceptable, you can simply amplify the taste, and 9 times out of 10 it will be more acceptable. And you know, I don't think it's sustainable into the long run to wean people off pleasure of eating and taste experience, because as soon as they would have that experience presented back to them again, they'll jump right back to where we were. So I think you have to consider the fundamental of it. This is why, I mean, and Daphne spoke about that, you see now a lot of work being done by companies such as ours is permanent in order to enable, let's say, sugar reduction or sodium reduction, but also to maintain all the taste and flavor. I think that's absolutely fundamental, and that's uniform.
It's great. So it's similar across East and West.
Listening to both of you, I'm thinking how much this is related to familiarity and how easy would be to create a completely novel food. You know, when you have less expectation there, it doesn't matter how that like that should feel like and what's now feel. The odor might be, you know, there it's we don't know how to talk about odors, but we definitely know if we like it or we don't like it. So we need to want to, you know, to have a somewhat pleasant odor. But would it be easier instead of calling in, I don't know, alternative meat or cultivated meat to create a new food pattern? That maybe we could less in the problems that you're describing in terms of taste and, you know, there's nothing to wean on. Because there's no precondition.
It's a significant discussion here in Singapore, for example, where a lot of effort is going into changing the food system.
Yeah.
And let's say copycat products always have a reference.
Mm-hmm.
And new products taking their own space.
I think that's quite interesting. Thought about cross-cultural food products. What if this is novel future food, for example? Because some of the things that we were talking about earlier as well, and Tina, for example, the idea of transporting a food flavor into a new kind of context, right? That has certain implications cross-culturally speaking, because we tie food very closely with our own identity. So the example is pineapple on pizza, right? So that's a
Aboard. If there's a mess, people from today, it's no pineapple.
that's adding new flavor to a familiar food product, right? And then, you know, obviously the tenants are all uproar about it, right? There is a kind of cross-cultural narrative going on there as well. So, for example, we take a Chinese type of flavor and put it into a burger. Would there be a similar pushback? So maybe that's an interesting question that.
I think that's a very important element is modern lifestyle change. People just running around and have no time to sit down to appreciate things, which is really, really bad. You have no time to appreciate the flavor and the leaves. One of my former colleague, Professor Al, he's organizing a program in the school children called food education. And just to teach your children how to appreciate food, particularly how to use your senses to appreciate the sweet and the salt. And this will help a lot, say, in the future. You know, while we are going to use the salt and the fat and the everything, but how we appreciate it, it's another very important element in future school education.
So instead of weaning people off players, maybe we teach them from a young age how to appreciate these things a bit better. Thank you very much. If there's any questions from the audience, yes, can we get microphones for us?
First off, this has been fascinating. So I'm carrying out my code, managing non-Yang Technological University. I studied food and language, and I was earlier, Dr. Valentini had mentioned that there's not enough language in English compared to Chinese. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the food literacy of the food language, and do you think that there's a need to help people learn how to taste? What words can you use when they come to your lab, more than just saying, oh, it's good. I mean, if you come across it, that people don't know what they're tasting, either that it's sweet or not, if there's a way to increase that food literacy.
It seems so. I come to this problem from a factory perspective, in particular, not necessarily the perspective. So that is one caveat, but I think it applies. Like if you don't have a training, it's hard to use the same word to mean the same things when it comes to olfactory stimuli. And I think this can be adapted to other textual properties. Taste is different. Like if people know what taste is and they don't confound it with flavor, then they are able to use those words a little bit better. And I have the proof because when we do psychophysical tests, where we tell them like if it's sweet, umami, salt, or we ask them, there's only a 4% difference in the way we classify people that have a dysfunction or not. And because there are few words and we agree on what those words are. The basic taste. If we start with starchy or fat taste, I think we're uncharted territory. Rather than Chinese, I was thinking of some of the literature in terms of the differences in language with some South Asian population, in particular hunter-gatherer. It seems that the difference in olfactory languages in particular is can you use the language for day-to-day functions and communicate with the others in an unequivocal way that there's something olfactorily happen that has social relevance. And usually this is connected to practices, religious practices or like way of life in a way. This hunter-gatherer population, they're called the Monique as a semi-berry, they're two different. It seems to have a very rich olfactory language. So also the when you ask them to define odors are much better to define odors as compared to define colors. And the other interesting bit from my own research is that when we ask if folks in Thailand, like which is the sense that you would give up, it's vision and it's not smell. I might have had 60 weirdos there. I mean, like that, I haven't replicated that. But it's the only country of the 22 that we looked at where we have a bias towards the importance of the sense of smell, which we know could be tied to Buddhist practices that are very present and have an olfactory component that is a little more common. But if we do the same study in the US, Italy, France, Africa, South America, we don't see that richness in the property. And this goes back to we can talk about odors or we can talk about the precision that can be shared. Factory objects are these flaky things. And there's not a clear hierarchy there. Even, but when you say citrus, we know what we're saying, it's large. When you say lemon, it's very precise. Where do we put the boundary between these two categories? It's a linguistic question that is probably
Interesting.
Yeah. Oh, I'll just add, just like a random, like, no, I grew up in Thailand, and like when we describe restaurants with kids, we would talk about like what smells. So like that's how we did.
so
Yeah, we did encourage and on that note too, like I grew up in Thailand and I lived in the US for quite a few years in Japan for quite a few years, and it's just really like as you're mentioning all of this, like thinking about how people would describe the food, whether you're living in the city or whether you're living a little bit more countryside. It's just so vastly different. It also depends on like the flavors you're used to. Like in Thailand, we're always touching on like different spices and things like that. In Japan, it's like maybe more of the quality and the tenderness and the texture and stuff. yeah, it's quite fun, I guess, to ponder about.
That's very interesting. Actually, I was also interested to look on this point of view because you are looking at global flavor trends from different countries. How do you manage the differences in either olfactory or flavor language?
I mean, it's a real challenge in terms of education and so on. I mean, I love these points around educating, learning more about how your senses experience the world and your senses smell and taste and practicing that because I think that can be a route to appreciating your food better. Most of the time, people are watching TV now, so the food is going in.
Yeah.
Or at the movie or whatever, and so there's not even paying any attention to tone. And within a flavor house, we have our own language, so we have a language that we use universally. We have 600 terms in that. And that becomes the standard across the board, and we use that also when we taste outside. So all the profiling is done. Very difficult to learn though. So even if it is the case that it can be learned, I think it's must be as hard to learn an older language as it is to learn any other language that you're not familiar with.
The other language I would subscribe to, even for others.
We have set up now because we established a library in our building here before where we have all of these references available all of the time, catalog for self-learning, the staff and so on. And then we run tests once a month so that persons up really just to try and build easily and practically the language of the world.
Thank you very much. Is there any other questions from the audience? Yes, one question there. Yeah.
So, Dr. Conner, yeah, I'm just curious about the sensory characteristics of the plant-based meat. I'm associated with the, you mentioned the off flavor and the beany and the oily and the greatnesses. So it had nothing to do with the real meat. Yes, and so do you think it's necessary to add some meaty flavorings during the processing of the plant-based meat? So I think it's maybe called plant-based, the protein is maybe better.
Yeah, I mean the proteins that come from plants are quite different to the proteins that come from an animal source.
Yes.
And then of course each plant also has its uniqueness, and then how that protein is processed also impacts on. If you're trying to make a plant protein, let's say taste equivalent to a meat, first thing you do is block all the binding sites. So in other words, because if you take a vanilla flavor, for example, and you put it into a milk, you probably have to put 2 or 3 times as much as what you would put into it because it's bound by the protein. So, and then you need to, you don't have all of the juicy character and so on that you have, dryness, vinegar, and then you can begin to typify. So there's in fact, it's like many layers that you need to do in order to bring something similar to what chicken or the, and I think this is why I'm not sure that that's the right type of approach, because you really are having to add a lot to make something that is trying to copycat when I'm sure there's a more efficient and effective approach to having a change to a plant-based or an alternate protein food system.
Maybe I ran any thought on that. Start some final thoughts, maybe.
Yeah, I think I want to reference to actually one of the points this morning we were looking at different proteins compared to whey and then the different viscosity difference. I thought that was a really that one viscosity difference was such a big factor on how people like the mouthfeel and the texture of the product. And I feel like that's just a really clear example of how just, I know we're talking about flavor, but like these proteins are just behaving so differently. So on that note, at GFI, we're also seeing like technologies like fermentation ingredients and cultivated meat, or like cultivated cell-based ingredients Obviously, we don't have all the answers yet. It's really hard to know until we get there, but potential ways of kind of helping fill in a bunch of these gaps without needing so many extra different ingredients. But also, this is where blended products, hybrid products could be a solution where like it can really bridge some of these gaps without having to just put too much in there. But yeah, it's a very loaded topic with a lot of complexity. So
So it's necessary to put some chemical BT flavorings to cover those old flavors.
yeah, I think that's what I was trying like kind of umami.
And it doesn't have to be chemical, it's often a cooked source but you manage to add back because meat does not taste like meat.
Like if you're at an extruder formulating like a beef product, there'll normally be like beef flavoring packages or like chicken flavoring things, which it's already pre-formulated to kind of help create that.
Thank you very much.